Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Philip, and this is a Photon Fusion multiplayer bite. In the first bite, we talked about how we can connect our Fusion Manager. And speaking of, if you want to access the scripts that I'm writing during these little bites, you can do so on my Patreon page at any one of my membership tiers. So making these videos, I don't really make any money from them. I think I just hit partner with YouTube, so I make like 1/100th of a cent per view or something like that. So if you want to support me, motivate me to continue making more of these videos, join the Patreon page. We'll have different rewards. I think we even have YouTube membership set up now. And there's rewards listed there that might be a little bit different than the rewards on Patreon. So you can support us through YouTube membership or through the Patreon page. I have a Discord channel just for Patreons. So check that out. Helps me out a bunch, motivates me to make these videos. So here we are, the Fusion Manager. All it does right now when we hit play is it just debugs in the console that we've joined. All right, so we look at the console and there we go, we've joined. And we have a network runner running. So let's get a demo scene. So what we're going to do is, and I kind of already did this and I regret it a little bit, but if you go to the asset store, Unity's asset store, they have a package called starter assets. And it says URP, but I'm not using URP. It's a super easy to fix. But we're just going to use the scene just so we have something to do. So once you get it from the asset store, import it to your project. You can do it from like right here by clicking open in Unity, or go window, package manager, and then search for it. All right. If you're using standard render pipeline like I am, you'll need to go to starter assets, third person controller, go to the materials, highlight all these materials, and change the shader to standard from URP. Otherwise it's going to be pink. All right. So I'm going to go to the scenes. We're going to go to the playground scene. And I'm not going to save my sample scene. As you can see, we're having some issues here with the playground as well materials. So let's find our playground materials. All right, so I found them by clicking on one of the game objects in the scene, going to the mesh renderer, look at the materials, and it took me to starter assets, environment, art, materials. And I'm just going to grab all these and change them to standard. And there we go. We have standard rendered pipeline view of the scene. All right, so in this environment, I believe this player is already set up to move in third-person view. So if we go ahead and hit play, again, keep in mind, this is not multiplayer at all yet. All right, after a little bit of loading, there we are. We have our camera that's moving with our mouse, and I can walk around. I can hold shift to run. I can jump. All right, it's a nice little environment we can explore here for testing out multiplayer. Now, I'm not a huge fan of using like pre-built stuff because then you have to go learn how it's been built so that you can modify it for your needs. But this is still going to work out pretty well for us because we're going to use this player and we're going to strip it and use it for multiplayer. Now, I've never tried doing this with Unity's player armature. I just grabbed it because the starter assets because I thought it'd be easier for some folks just getting started and playing around. All right, so let's get from our other scene. Let's bring our Fusion Manager in here. So we're just going to grab our starter scene and then grab our Fusion Manager, drop it in, and then right-click, remove that scene, and not save it. All right, so now we have our Fusion Manager in the scene. So let's take a look at our player armature. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unpack the prefab. And what do we have right here? So this is kind of how I would set it up. So, interestingly, the animator is on the root. Typically I've seen like the animator is on, well, maybe I've seen it like that, but we've got a character controller to walk around with. There's a controller. I don't know what this basic rigid body push does. Maybe it's so that they can push objects around the scene. They have the input controls all here, which we're probably going to remove. You know what? We might just be able to modify it. So let's see if we can just modify this a little bit so that we can just use it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder for prefabs. And if we take the player armature and we just call this player, all right, so we have our root player. That's essentially an empty. And then we have the player camera root, which is, I guess, what the camera is looking at. using Cinemachine. Oh, main camera, Cinemachine. Where's our Cinemachine camera? Oh, player follow camera right there. So we're looking at the player camera root. The geometry has the mesh on it. Looks like there's like some reflection probes and stuff on it. That's interesting. And then we have our skeleton. All right. So if we just take this player and the very least that we would need is for it to be spawned in is we need to add the network object component. And because this is a player object, we don't want it to be able to be controlled by someone else. I'm going to uncheck allow state authority override. And then I want it to be destroyed when the player leaves because it's a player object. Notice it hasn't been baked yet. It'll bake itself when you save the scene or drag it into prefabs. But I found that saving the scene does a better job of it. And then another thing we're going to want is we're going to want a network transform. And what this component does is it keeps track of where the player is and transmits that over the network. But something it needs, and in the newer version of Fusion that's coming out, they say it's not going to need it, but it needs an interpolation target. And you can just use really any child of the player. I used to just drag in the mesh and put it there, but I'm actually just going to create an empty and do interpolation target. And go back to the player. And go all the way down to my network transform and drag my interpolation target on there. And then that's really all we need for our player to spawn in. So if I take this player now and I drag it into prefabs. Also, I think I saved the scene. But I think it's baked. So we go like this. All right. It seems to be baked. Cool. All right, so now let's go to our Fusion Manager. And in our Fusion Manager, we're not seeing it. Unity's been like this for me. It's not, the inspector's not locked. Oh, it's compiling, and it's not letting me see the inspector till it's done compiling. All right, so Fusion Manager, let's open this up. All right, so right here, I'm used to looking at 2019 Visual Studio, and I just recently switched to 2022, and I'm still getting used to it. We're gonna do a public game object. I mean, really, it doesn't need to be public. I guess we can do serialize field, and then we can just do game object. Actually, no, this would be a network object. And this is going to be our player prefab. And then, let's see. Do we do it on connected to server? On player joined, we don't want to use because that's when any player joins. But I kind of want to use that because on connected doesn't mean that we are in the room yet. And what you'd probably want to do is you would probably want to wait to spawn your character until you're in the scene that you want to be. So you'd probably have like some on-scene loaded callback. But for this, I'm just going to do on connected to server. Let's go ahead and just do this here. And we're going to do runner.spawn. And then this is going to be the player prefab. And in the spawn method, notice there's a ton of other stuff here. You can tell it where you want the position to be. You can tell who has input authority over it. And let's just go ahead and I'm not going to do, I guess we can show it. So let's do comma. We want our position to be vector 3.0. And we want our rotation to be, I'm not even going to mess with it. I'm just going to put our position at 0, 0, 0. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's call this, we need to reference this. So the network object, player object equals this thing that gets spawned. And then I want to do runner dot local player dot, what am I looking for here? Runner dot player set player object, and the player reference is runner dot local player, And then the object is going to be the player object. So what did we just do here? So if you remember from the previous byte, the Fusion Manager, when the runner's loading, which we can't see yet, it keeps track of the local player's game object. So it destroys it essentially when the player leaves. So what we're doing is we're spawning that player object, and then we're telling the network runner that the player object of the local player is this player object that we just spawned. So if we save that, why are you mad? As an incorrect signature. Well, it came automatically, so we're just leaving that. We can't change that. All right, so let's see what happens now if we go back into Unity, and then we go to our assets, we go to our prefabs, we come back here to our Fusion Manager, and we go and put our player here. Let's see what happens if we just hit play. Okay, so we're here, and our camera will not do anything. We can control our player, but our camera does not know who our player is. So what we need to do is we need to keep track of our camera. So we have our player follow camera. So let's just make this super easy, and I'm just going to create a camera manager. Because I don't like, well, I guess we could find it. I guess we'll do that. We'll just find it. So there's our player follow camera. That's the name of this thing. And let's just go into our player. And we're going to create a new script. We're going to call this get player camera. Okay, and then we're going to wait for it to compile. Okay, I think it's done compiling. So now we can put the get player camera on the player. Then we click our player and scroll all the way down to our new script. All right. And so we're going to, what are we going to do? We need a serialized field. And this needs to be a, what is the, does it look for a transform? Or is it, yeah, it looks for a transform. So we need, transform player camera look at. Now let's keep the variable similarly named. What is it called on the player? Player. Geez, let's collapse all that. Alt click. Player camera root. Okay, that's what we're gonna call it. Player camera root. All right, so we're gonna get that. We're gonna store that. And then on private void awake, we're going to game object, and this is going to be the virtual camera equals game object dot find the player follow camera. All right, and we're going to get the component from that. So we're going to virtual camera dot get component. And the component that we are going to get, if we go to our virtual camera, is the Cinemachine virtual camera. Cinemachine virtual camera. And it's going to be all like, I don't know what this is. So we're going to Alt-Enter while hovering over it and do using Cinemachine. And then we're going to set the, what was it using? I think it was just using, was it using the follow and the look at? I can't honestly remember. It must have just been using the follow because the aim is doing nothing. So we're just going to do the follow equals, and this should equal our player camera root. All right. Why is awake like we're not doing anything? Oh, well. Let's just come over here. And on our player, scroll to the bottom. We need to tell it what the player camera root is. There we go. And let's hit play. All right, so here's our player camera root. And yeah, seems like we're moving our camera now. Huzzah. And so our player is moving around. Now here's a problem though. If I were to build this right now, I guess I should do that so you can see what happens. So in build settings, I'm going to delete the old sample scene from the scene build. Again, I went to File, Build Settings. I added the playground here, I added the open scene. And one thing I like to do, especially when I'm testing multiplayer, is I like to go to Player Settings, go to Resolution and Presentation. We're going to change this to Windowed, and we're going to change this to like 640 by 480. And that should be good. And now I'm going to build this. So I got to create a new folder here. I'm just going to call it Build. And then that's where I'm going to build it. All right, so as you can see on build, we have a character and we're moving, but if we bring in another character, it's like locked in my mouse. All right, so here I am in the editor. Notice my camera is not moving at all, and I can't control my character anymore. I'm actually controlling this character. All right, so if we look at our player follow camera, it's trying to go to this player camera route. And if we go look at the network object, runtime info, we don't have state authority of it. So it does not belong to us. It belongs to player 0, which is the first player to enter. So our camera is looking at the other player. And I guess I'm actually surprised. I guess the reason that we can't control the other player is because we don't have input authority or state authority over it. Yeah. So generally, the reason this has happened is if we go to our player and we go to our get player camera, this is running for every single character that spawns in. So we might get lucky and it might spawn for our player, but most likely not, because our player is going to enter first for us, and then all the other players in the room are then going to be generated. So what we need to do is that we need to get if it's mine. And the proper way to do this is to make sure that this network object is ready. It's like spawned and ready. I don't know. There's something that uses for that. But we're going to come up here and do using Fusion. We might need to make this a network behavior, but I don't think we have to. So we're probably not going to be able to do this on awake. That'll probably be too soon. What we're probably going to do is private void start. And we're going to say if we're going to say network object. And this is going to be root. What's it called? Root. The root is this dot transform dot root. So what this is going to do is whatever's well, actually, this is on the player. So yeah, I don't know what I'm thinking. We just need to get. We're on the network object. Okay, so we just need to say if. I still want to get the network object. Network object. This object equals get component network object. And I don't have to define where to get it from because it's just going to get it from this game object that it's on. So if this object dot has state authority. And so what that means, do I have state authority of this network object? So if I do have state authority of this network object, then I want to do that camera logic there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't know why in these builds, I think it's this version of Unity, like it locks my mouse in there and I can't escape out. It's really weird. So now if we come over here, and generally what I would also do is on the player input script, before it does any of that, I would also normally check for state authority also. But I guess you don't have to because it's not going to let you control the player if you don't own it anyways. All right, so, I mean, it looks like our camera is working, but we need to really do a build and see if it's working. All right, so here it is, it's spawned again. And now let's see how it works on the other, in the editor. All right, here we are in the editor. And as you can see, I am controlling my player here. And if we come over to this build, you can see that I can control the player. But do you notice that there's something wrong? And that's that we are not seeing the walking animation. So let's fix that. So fixing the walking animation is really easy. Let's just go back to the player. Let's find where our animator is. It's right here on the root. And we just do network mechanism animator. And we just need to say what the animator is. I think this will find it at runtime. But I guess just to be safe, let's just drag the player into itself there. And you can have synced settings for what all you want synced. If there's certain things you don't want synced, you can do that. But for what we're doing, it should just be good out of the box. So let's just do another build and run. All right, so here I am. I'm moving. Let's go to the other build. Can we see that we're moving? No. Interesting. The animation is not syncing. I wonder why. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because I don't know how they have their animator set up, I'm just going to tell it to sync everything. And let's just go ahead and peek at it. I mean, nothing, there's only one layer. So I don't know why it would be having issues. But yeah, I've never had issues ever with syncing that. Maybe we need to rebuild the prefab table. Oh, I bet that's oftentimes with the prefabs, stuff doesn't get updated if you just change it in prefab mode. So just to be safe too, let's bring the player here. And we're syncing that, we're syncing everything. It sees all the states, sees one trigger. Is that right? Let's go look. Darn it. Oh, it's right here. Parameters. We have 0 triggers. Because this is a float. That's a bool float. So we have 0 triggers. So I'm curious what trigger it's saying. But oh well. I'm gonna close that. There's the player. And I'm just going to save the scene. It'll rebake the prefab, and then I can just delete that. All right, I'm going to try another build and run. This is really weird. So I had a thought, and let's close this other one. Remember how I said you have to check state authority, and normally I do that before I do movement controls? Well, I was thinking, even though that we're not moving the player that's not ours, it's still probably trying to send inputs to the animator, and that's why our network mechanism thing isn't working, because it's sending just 0 values and it's overriding the network sync. So if we look at our third-person controller, let's go in here. Maybe we'll find where they send the values to the animator. You know what? We're going to do this super easy. I'm not a huge fan of doing this, but we're actually going to just, for now, disable the third-person controller. And then, because we're already seeing if we have state authority in the get player camera, here we'll just say get component third person character controller, and then enabled equals true. And so now what'll happen is if it's ours, we're going to enable that third person character controller. And if it's not, it'll just stay disabled. And let's see if that fixes our network animation issue. And bada bang, bada boom, that was the issue. We were sending a bunch of null values to the animator and it was overriding the network animator component. As you can see, we also have a null issue over here. It does seem to have stopped. So, oh, this on foot step on the player is trying to do something on the third person controller. But I'm not worried about that now. Because when you're building your own scenes, you really aren't going to be using the starter assets, so you'll be able to write it. But you're getting the concepts now and how we can sync stuff. So we're going to stop this bite here. And what we're going to do next, I think, is talk about syncing player stats like name and health and stuff like that. So we'll see you next time. Oh, don't forget to check out Patreon. I'll put the one script we made on there along with a link to this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you next time.